I presume you can see and hear me now.
See and hear me?
I can't hear you. Let's turn this up.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, a little bit.
Okay. You might need to turn the volume up on your.
Yeah, let me turn off my air conditioner. Alexa, turn off the Alexa, turn off the office air conditioner. There we go.
How are you doing? It's so nice to meet you.
I'm doing fine. I'm here in Petersburg, Michigan.
Wow, you're way up there.
Well, yeah, or over here. We're in the southeastern part of Michigan, about 11 miles north of Toledo, Ohio. Basically, this part of Michigan is Ohio.
Gotcha.
It's Michigan.
Well, my name is Chad Honeycutt. I own Evidence-Based Classroom Solutions. I appreciate you jumping on with us. Ted and I do this little webcast weekly, and this week we were doing kind of myths in special education and behavior interventions.
Okay.
That you would have a lot of fun with that. So.
Okay. I heard Kim Schreck is going to be here.
She may be. She was on Tuesday, and I invited her to come back. She had so much fun. She may show up.
Oh, may show up. How many people are involved in this besides us two?
It'll be me, you, Ted, and then two of my people, Kate and Katie, two young behavior analysts. And
okay.
I don't know if Ted's told you about our company, but what we do is we push into public school systems and support and coach and model applied behavior analysis in public schools.
Okay.
So.
Well, that's good. I mean, we may have public schools in the future.
Yeah, eventually, right?
Yeah, I know a fair number of teachers out here in Michigan and northern Ohio, and they're basically, they went online in March, and they haven't literally, some of them, set foot in their building since then.
It is just a bag full of chaos right now. Nobody knows what will happen. Everybody has a little bit different plan. I think everybody's plans are all best intentions, but it's going to be interesting.
Well, Michigan, we were all congratulating ourselves, patting ourselves on the back by our little graph going down and down. And all of a sudden, literally the last 3 days, it's just shot up faster than it's ever shot up before in terms of people getting sick. And so all of a sudden we were going, hey, we're past this. And now all of a sudden we're going, oh man. And now you can't get a haircut again.
Yeah. And fortunately for me, that's not really that big of a deal. I just kind of do my own little thing.
No, for me, I'm getting to be a hippie.
It's okay. It's a good look for you. It's a good look for you.
I'm going to see if, maybe luxurious locks. We'll see what happens. Oh, here's another person.
Hey guys.
So this is Katie, Jim, Katie.
Good morning, Jim.
Hello.
We were just talking about growing our hair out.
Yeah, well, I have a lot of it.
Yeah, well, it's getting there for me.
I'm out of Bulgarian wine.
Oh, no.
Bulgarian cognac, but I ran out of Bulgarian styling gel yesterday.
Oh, that's even worse.
On that, and this is what I'm left with.
It's really bad.
I have a Bulgarian suit, and
really,
it is actually it's like if you were a cartoonist and wanted to draw a stereotype of a Bulgarian suit, it's literally square.
Nice.
Yeah, it's exactly what, I don't know what Bulgarians wear, but it's what you would imagine they would.
They're very stylish people.
Yeah, it's a pretty eclectic fashion statement over there.
That might be why they sent that suit over here.
Yeah, they didn't want it.
No, I didn't want it either. I don't know where I got it, but
You don't want to disappear.
Were you bad that year? Was it a Christmas present?
I don't know, but it was literally like those simplicity patterns. It's
yes, my mom used to use those.
Yeah,
it's sort of like somebody took the package and used the square, to make the suit instead of opening it up and seeing it was inside.
It was a look. I mean, that's a look.
Yeah.
Well,
the Bulgarian wine situation is getting really, really serious. This came up in conversation. Katie, I don't know if you were still on with Anastasia yesterday when we were talking about it, but it's getting really serious. And Anastasia feels very bad for us, and her peanut butter supply is getting very low. So
Yeah.
Jim, we actually do some support over in Bulgaria.
Yeah. I mean,
I've got this
peanut
little
butter?
kind of like, yeah, well, I've got a modern day, what was it? The rum, molasses triangle thing back in colonial days. I take peanut butter to Bulgaria and ABA and I bring back wine.
Well, they have peanut butter in Holland. They Pentecost.
Yeah, but see, our peanut butter is loaded with sugar.
Got
Yeah.
all that stuff in it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's got all that stuff in it that makes us all very unhealthy people. So
Well, because when I lived in Holland, most of Europe doesn't have peanut butter, but they have it in Holland. And the guy who brought the milk float by heard I was an American, and as he understood American culture, it consisted entirely of kids eating peanut butter.
Mhm.
And so that
That's
was
pretty
actually the first time I had peanut butter was when I lived in the Netherlands.
yeah, and now like half the kids in the United States are allergic to peanuts. So go figure. It's like, but no, it's funny. We used to host exchange students for a long time, and peanut butter and Kraft mac and cheese were the two things that really were locked in on that they couldn't get back home.
Kraft
So
mac and
whenever we
cheese
would go
is.
visit, it's special. It,
It is.
you know,
Oh,
yeah.
I love it.
it warms the heart, warms the
It
soul.
does.
Yeah.
It does.
Yeah.
That's about it. I don't know about nutrition wise, but it tastes delicious.
It's got to be healthy. I mean, it's got dairy, and
Kind of. Cheese product. I don't. Does it? Does it?
So,
I don't know.
all right.
My kid decided to gain weight. He joined the army, but he had to make weights, and somebody told him eating peanut butter was the thing. So we got
That'll do it.
these giant jars of peanut
Yeah.
butter sitting around the house.
You can bulk up with peanut butter for sure. Yeah.
Well, you actually have to eat it.
I wish someone. Yeah, I mean, it'd be awesome if someone's like, "I need you to sit down and eat a bunch of peanut butter and gain some weight." Like, yes, sir.
Yeah, my oldest son is a wrestler, and they make he wrestled 106 his senior year of high school. He's going to college to wrestle, and the lowest weight in college is 125. So he's just been kind of on this "I'm going to eat whatever I want to" spree kind of thing. And he's weighing 124 now, which
Well,
Awesome.
for Steven is like
That's awesome. Yeah,
massive.
it must be
That's
like
like
lean. Yeah.
yeah.
and have you told him that trend doesn't stop? That
He
Yeah.
more than one time he's been compared to me in a lot of different ways, personality, the way he looks. So I was like, Steven, this is what you have to look forward to, so eventually you're going to have to curtail the eating, but it's all good. So it's a little bit after 9:30. I guess we'll go ahead and get started. Jim, thanks for being here. And if you could just kind of introduce yourself and give us your background, that would be great. Ted just said, hey, this guy's coming on.
Oh, well, yeah, generally you can trust him, but this time, no. No, I'm Jim Todd. All of you know that. I'm from Eastern Michigan University. I was trained in behavior analysis at the University of Kansas back in the 70s and 80s.
Wow.
And that's actually around the time I met Ted. I don't even know if he knows when I met him. But
Was it at ABBA one year?
it was before that, but then I think you were also at Kennedy Krieger doing some eating stuff.
Yeah, I managed the inpatient side of the pediatric feeding disorders
with
program.
Robbie Babbitt
Yes.
and those people.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I just actually supervised a dissertation on that.
Oh, cool.
You were going to be our outside person if we couldn't get another outside person.
Okay.
But I've been doing stuff about pseudoscience and autism treatment and related stuff for a long time, since basically around 1991 or 92.
Cool.
And so facilitated communication, but all this stuff. And I've done court cases and, been an expert witness and presented things. And that I think that's what you're looking for in terms of my background.
Yeah, just very interesting. We had Kim on Tuesday, and of course, anytime I'm standing next to Ted, I just realize all the things I haven't learned yet. And having Kim on Tuesday was just so educational. And I'm hearing that you trained in Kansas back in really when things were getting going in our field. It's pretty exciting to have you here. We've got one more of our people that just jumped on, the amazing Kate Hazelwood.
Hi.
Okay.
Sorry, I was wrapping up on a lesson, but happy to be here.
Yeah, so Jim, one of the things that we're having to do is rethink how we interact with students because everything's online. So we're trying to to still support the schools and the teachers, the students, but online, it's all different now. So
Yeah, it is, and I think we're going to learn that we know how to we not necessarily know how to do it, but I think we'll adapt.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Despite
absolutely.
the folks running around waving their arms in the air about the ends of education a few months ago.
Right.
I think
It's
we're-
uncomfortable. I think like
It is.
that's it. It's the change and transition's uncomfortable, and having to rethink what we've done in the past. But I mean, I'm on a high right now because the student did fantastic. So
Yay, that's so exciting.
fantastic.
That feels good.
it's just
Yeah.
exciting.
It is.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm thinking,
But we really haven't rethought education in a long time. So maybe this is a silver lining to this, that we're going to rethink the way we're doing.
Yeah, it could be a
Education a little
catalyst
bit.
to better things, but it is
Yeah.
always scary when answers haven't been, questions haven't been answered. So,
Yeah.
there's just a lot we're still figuring out. We're adapting, but the process is, there's growing pains for sure.
well, there's
well,
kind
one
of
of
a
the
back-
go
There's
ahead.
kind of a back to the future thing. When I worked as a radio engineer for KANU Radio, it's an NPR station in Lawrence for 7 years. But before it was an NPR station, it was what was called Kansas School of the Air. And they literally delivered classes over FM radio to all
Awesome.
the rural kids.
That's
And
so
that
cool.
was a fairly common educational model back in
Interesting.
the way olden days.
I had
And
no idea.
Yeah.
if you proposed something like that, somebody would think you were insane. You put classes on the radio? But that's one of the reasons historically why if you find a radio station, an FM radio station that has higher than the standard legal power, they
Uh-huh.
were usually educational stations that were
Wow.
broadcasting classroom stuff.
Because we listen to podcasts, so that makes sense. Why not
Yeah.
learn through that platform? That's awesome.
And then the students would literally mail in their assignment.
Correspondence courses.
So
It's
cool.
so funny. This feels so new, but it's really so old.
Yeah.
We're just kind of cycling back around. It's like bell bottoms coming back. So
Oh, no,
I
don't
guess-
say that.
No.
They already did, didn't they? They did.
they
and
did.
then
Yeah,
kinda
they made a
left.
comeback.
Yeah, they
I had some. High school. We don't have to talk about it.
Hey, yeah, no, yeah.
It wasn't a
Annoying
flattering
me
time
enough, I'm
period.
gonna
It
bring
was a
back
weird
old
time.
pads, so.
As long as we don't get gaucho pants, I'm okay.
That's rough.
All right,
Yeah.
I'm gonna pretend like I know what that is, but
It's like
I really,
a skirt, but they're pants.
Okay.
And gentlemen wore them too.
Sneaky.
Interesting. So Jim, I have a question for you, and unfortunately, Kim went on this rant about facilitated communication on
A good
Tuesday.
rant.
So,
Ed did.
and Ted, yeah, he went on a rant too
Okay.
about it. So, what besides facilitated communication, what is one of those kind of pseudosciences that just kind of grinds on you that you see kind of emerging and just sticking around like gum on your shoe and won't go away?
Well, aside from facilitated communication, which comes back in different ways, and one of the things they do is, of course, I'll start with this and then I'll move on, is the facilitated communication people and the rapid prompting people, and the rapid prompting people, of course, hold the letterboard and move it around. They say that's non-physical. I think things moving in time and space is physical, but that's just me because I went to school. They're basically saying those are training methods now, and the actual typing is not facilitated communication or rapid prompting. And so they're trying to get around that attachment there. But the other thing that bugs me is not a specific treatment or intervention. It's the very, very low standards of evidence for treatments in the autism journals. And I'll give you an example. Floor time, play therapy in Ann Arbor. There's a big center run by a guy named Richard Solomon. And they did, at the cost of almost $2 million, randomized clinical trial. They compared their stuff to basically not doing it. And it's a parent training thing. So the parents were trained. And what they found was they took about 25 different measures. And what they found was scattered gains throughout those 25 measures among the dozens of kids. So everybody improved in something, which you would actually expect.
Right.
You would expect some to go up and some to go down. So they reported this kid went up here and this kid went up there. There were no gains in language, no gains in cognitive ability reported. So basically they showed that their therapy didn't work. And they sent that to the journal, and the journal editors reading it not only had to have seen basically no gains in the main things that we would like to see, which is being able to talk and solve problems, literally no gains at all, and scattered gains everywhere else, which anybody who's trained in any kind of statistics at all would go, oh, well, if you do 25 measures with 40 kids, you know, some of them are going to go up statistically significantly. And let me add some more to this. 42% of the control group kids who were diagnosed as having autism at the beginning of the study, this isn't the treatment group, this is the control group, tested as not having autism at the end.
Whoa.
And they accepted this study, and now on the Play Project website, they say this stuff is empirically validated. Now, what's empirically validated is that it doesn't work.
Weird.
And what's also empirically validated, and I sometimes use this as a joke, is if the 42% of the control group improves that much, why do the therapy? Why not just tell people they're in a control group and just lie to them? And 42% of their kids will test as not having autism later.
It certainly costs less, doesn't it?
It does. I mean, the wait list control, I mean, you have to call them on the phone every once in a while, but you know, you can get anybody to do that. But that kind of logic, I picked on one study, but that kind of logic pervades the industry, sensory integration. You can report literally no effects at all and get it in the journal, slap the word pilot on the front of the, you know, the title or something like that. And that's what really bugs me. So that's the answer to your question. Where are you? I'm pointing to you on the screen there.
It's okay. We kind of move around. We shuffle around. No, that's really interesting. And one of the things like that I think that study speaks to, I know for us as educators, that really grinds on us is this myth that all children have autism. And I kind of wonder in that group of labeled children with autism, how many actually had autism if they reported those differences. I think one of the biggest myths in special education is if you have a medical diagnosis of autism, you get services for autism in special education, but that's not really true. And while we're real proponents of ABA kind of branching out and away from just, you know, that niche of autism, we still really get lumped into it, especially as it relates to the schools. But I think that's a really big issue of just how we quantify and diagnose autism.
A diagnosis of autism, like any psychiatric diagnosis, is made on the basis of behavioral display. But you don't get data on it. It's incredibly highly subjective. You know, if you've been trained in the ADOS, if you know how the ADOS is done, you're discouraged from taking data while you're doing the ADOS, while you're administering it. And you place a task before the child, and you have to make sure that you place the task before the child correctly. But what you're looking for isn't the child's performance on that task, it's other stuff. So you have to be really good and have those two things going on. But you can't take notes on it while it's happening. And so you have to do your report, you have to do your interpretation and everything afterwards. So it's and you're not working with, it's not norm referenced, it's not criterion referenced, it's based on your experience. A lot of the other assessments are also highly subjective. They're either informant based or some may rely on performance from the child, and then you have to consult norms tables or whatever, and those I think are a little more solid. But the diagnosis, I think if you go to 5 different psychologists or neuropsychs or psychiatrists or developmental pediatricians, you might get 4 or 5 different reports from them.
Right.
Yeah.
They do not see the same.
We've seen those.
Yeah, and that was the issue with this study that I was talking about. What it looks to me is they threw out all the kids with really difficult behavior because those aren't candidates for this therapy, which leaves all these kids right in the middle, some of whom don't have autism because you have somebody who is a little bit more biased towards diagnosing autism in the middle,
Mhm.
maybe because they think the kid's going to get a service.
Yeah.
You know, maybe the kid has some sort of unusual behavior and they say, if I say autism, they get insurance. If I say something else, they don't, which is the case in a lot of states.
Right.
Yeah, that's very
And
true.
and so you're right. Ted's right about the ADOS and things like that. We had an issue in Michigan with the ADOS where when we did the autism insurance bill, they wanted to use the ADOS as the only standard
Mm.
for autism. Now, the ADOS has a specificity of 0.93, which sounds good, but that's a 7% false positive rate.
Mhm.
Now, most of the time, you're not testing ordinary kids, but still, that's pretty high, especially if you have kids who are, for example, in the schools where you're right at the margins. You're going to overdiagnose a lot of the kids.
Yeah. And it's very, and I find it to be very environmentally determinant on the results. So if you have a kid go to an outside, maybe psychologist or developmental pediatrician that runs it, and they've never actually interacted with that person before, they're scoring a much, they're indicating a much higher prevalence of autism.
Yeah.
Whereas if they're taking it in the school where they're more familiar with the environment and the people administering it, they're scoring with a lower prevalence of autism. So I've seen like parents come in with basically prescriptions for ABA and prescriptions for FBAs to schools, which is
Right.
not a real thing. Like that shouldn't exist.
Mhm.
But then when the school does the ADOS, the scores are completely on the other end of the spectrum, and it creates a lot of conflict between parents and the school systems because of that. So I think yeah.
Well, one thing is Ted and I are old enough to have been trained differently than we do now. I have props. I don't know if I'm getting paid, but I should. But I brought
love this.
props. And one of them is Robert Rosenthal's book, Experimenter Effects in Behavioral Research. That was 60s and 70s stuff where he would do all these cool, ingenious experiments where they would tell people kind of what they were looking for, and then they would get it because, of course, they would randomly assign the subjects or the rats or whatever. And you know, whoever was told that they were going to get the smart rats had smart rats, or the kids who tested well regardless.
Mhm.
And this was a huge thing in the 70s and 80s. And so I still have this book. And every psychology class talked about some Robert Rosenthal study. And that goes to what Ted was saying and what you're saying is this sort of bias that is often unconscious. And you said the word well-intentioned earlier. And, you know, most of the time, nobody is getting hurt by these diagnoses, at least immediately. You know, you say, hey, the kid has autism or the kid doesn't have autism, and at least somebody goes away satisfied that they've got some sort of answer. So there's immediate reinforcement for the clinician. And if the kid is behaving strangely and needs services or doing something troublesome and needs services, I shouldn't say strangely, because that would be us sitting in rooms on Thursday morning on the computer talking. But and then, you know, maybe somebody now sets in motion some services. And so that's the kind of biases that Rosenthal was talking about that go into even diagnosis, like with Ted on the ADOS, because you're watching this kid do something and the behavior is a little marginal. And at the end of the thing, you're kind of going, yeah, that was a little unusual when maybe it wasn't.
Well, if I even remember it, because I haven't taken notes on it.
Yeah.
And I'm focusing on presenting the task correctly. And then I have to not pay attention to the child doing the task, but instead watch for the things I'm supposed to watch for.
Yeah, and I have a student. One of the reasons why the ADOS is not the standard in Michigan anymore was one of my students happened to be at one of the lobbying group meetings and raised her hand. She was a graduate student, and they're smarter than we are. I mean, I don't know if Ted will admit that, but I will. But and she raised her hand and said, if you just do the ADOS, you're going to be overdiagnosing kids. You have to do this panel of tests. And she explained more or less what Ted was explaining, that this is going to be a problem. And of course, I think I don't know what she does to avoid that problem, but I think that her group, she's trained directly by Kathy Lord. So so there's I don't know what they do, but they seem to do it fairly well. But still, it's a lot of these things are subjective, like the questionnaires that they give to parents.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's so much reporting, right? Like, and it's the parents' perspective. And again, I think a lot of it is environmental. I'm always fascinated by the turns that these conversations take, but I would actually argue that there is harm done in the diagnosis because the bar gets lowered so much.
Yes.
And I think that a lot of parents change the way they parent when they hear it's autism. And I think that that's something that's got to be recognized.
Because oftentimes
Especially-
it becomes I mean, I've had experience where, and it's not done intentionally, but it's like, well, they have autism, and it's like, but we can't use, like, that's not, we have to move past that. We can't look at the child as just autism. They're a child first. How are we going to move past this? And like, Ted's been talking a lot about, we have to teach, just giving them a scribe, giving them someone that can just read for them. Like, that doesn't teach them how to read. We need to teach them how to apply the skills.
That's
And
the whole
teachers
universal-
are sorry.
I'm sorry. That's the whole universal design thing, which is
Yeah.
in terms of cutouts for curbs, so
Mhm.
people using wheelchairs could use them. But it's awful in that it doesn't teach kids who can't read how to read.
Yep.
It doesn't teach kids who can't do math how to do math, because instead everything's on the calculator. Awful thing. Hey, Jim, we encounter a lot of good stuff in schools, and also, believe it or not, a lot of nonsense. Occasionally we come across something that seems kind of hinky. One of the things this last year that we saw a lot was this program called Unique, which is supposed to be used to teach kids. It's a computer program, it's web-based, to teach kids how to read and how to do math. And what I observed kids doing in classrooms is just clicking on anything, because eventually you get the right answer and you move on to the next page. What would be your advice for us and for any teachers watching and any behavior analysts watching on spotting something that's a fraud?
Well, if it's cheap and easy, it's probably a fraud. I mean, anything that's new and revolutionary probably isn't, and that's the problem. Is probably the case that if you put kids in front of these Unique programs, some of them come out probably reading and doing a little bit of math. But that's the case with any kind of education, and we have to worry about whether or not we're actually educating or selecting the kids who, in graduate school, you have some graduate students here, they might not know the big secret is that we just pick people who can endure what we do and eventually learn despite what we do. But I mean, that's the problem. If it's cheap, if it's easy, if it hasn't been tested, and obviously some things that haven't been tested just work because they just haven't had time, but that's usually not the case. One of the big clues that I usually take is that when you see all these claims about how this thing works really well, combined with no research on how it does this stuff. And then the question comes up that should be universal. If this thing works so well for so many people, it ought to be really easy to show. And not your students, but some students are lazy when they want to do a thesis. And if these things really worked, if facilitated communication really worked, or Unique really worked, or floor time really worked, or sensory integration really worked, our journals would be full of easy studies showing that they worked. It wouldn't be hard, including this Unique program. If it's on a computer and it's relatively cheap, it shouldn't be too hard to test, and you throw a few kids in the group and have some other kids. And what you're going to do is you're going to find out they don't work, because the failure that you talked about, Ted, is the standard failure of a lot of teaching, including some that behavior analysts do, which is you give the child multiple opportunities, they finally stumble on the answer, and a new opportunity is always a higher probability of reinforcement.
Yeah.
If you have a multiple choice system where there's 3 tries, you've got a VR3. which is a very rich schedule of reinforcement.
Yeah.
Right.
And getting a wrong answer might be easier in terms of response cost than thinking about it. So you can just grind through, and at
Yep.
the end, you've done well enough. And over time, you might learn some stuff, but the things that usually aren't programmed that way.
Mhm.
And so, like if you wanted to fix your unique program, you have to make right answers, of course, super reinforcing, and you have to make wrong answers awful. You have to stop everything. You have to time it out, and most of these things don't want to have a delay, for example, after a wrong answer, because then it'll take 3 times as long to run the thing, and then the kid will get bored.
Yeah.
So here's my question too, Ted. With some of with experience that I've seen, at least in elementary, I mean, they've started introducing technology like in kindergarten. Typically it's an iPad or one of those little old school iPods, and then by 2nd grade they start to introduce the laptop. But the thing is, it's like we really don't teach it. It's like we may and so that's the other part of it too. It's because computers technically, they'll say, well, you can use Computer Station as a station within your classroom where your kids can independently complete this. And for some students, they're not at a level yet to do something independently on the computer.
Yeah, my old school was big, thick 1st grade pencils and paper with big lines on it. That was my old school. No old school iPads or iPod. But, technology is nice, but it's only instructional technology if it actually serves an instructional purpose. And, providing an iPad or iPod doesn't do anything except give a kid an iPad or iPod. Putting an educational program on it is nice, but the program itself has to be well designed to actually teach.
Yeah.
Right.
And there needs to be differential consequences so that, there's actually learning going on. And it would be nice if it could provide some data too, provide you some assessment of how well the student did. And if progress to the next level, like in video games, is based on a certain level of performance.
But that the kid didn't see it as punishing. You know what I mean? They've mastered a certain level. And so that, it gets where a lot of times the task is going to get a little bit harder, but we want it to be reinforcing, like you've been talking about as well throughout this.
Well,
Sometimes kids notice.
Works that way in World of Warcraft, I'm told. Works that way in Minecraft.
Sure, Ted, sure.
I don't even know how these things work. I have Old Man Sudoku and Old Man Boggle on my phone. Those are my only games. I don't know, and I still have a rotary dial phone in the kitchen.
One of the questions would be is why don't people I know why, because they make more money making games, but why isn't the logic that causes kids to be addicted to these games being applied to educational programs? Because I don't see a lot of kids running these educational programs who are begging to stay on them.
Please, Mom, let me stay on Starfall, please.
Yeah,
Well,
and obviously, these games have reinforcers in them that are probably more interesting than getting a correct answer on a math problem. But one of the things they know, it's the same thing that Steve Jobs knew when he made the first iPod, is that immediacy is the key. The first iPod was successful, even though it cost $400, because you could get to your song, any song you wanted, immediately. You had a variety and immediacy and reinforcers. And educational programs don't usually offer that. They offer you the option of trying to find one potential fairly weak reinforcer, which is a right answer.
But
Katie, what were you going to say?
I was just going to mention, usually in my experience working with educational programs on computers or iPads or whatever, it's usually it turns into a semi-independent activity, right? I am also providing another form of reinforcement, whether it's attention and praise. It's usually it would be nice if that didn't have to be that way, but typically to get a child to stay on an educational program, there's more reinforcement happening. So it would be cool if those games would have the level of reinforcement that other games do. But
you don't have to force kids to play Roblox or World of Warcraft. And imagine that kid had to reach a certain level of math fluency in World of Warcraft before the door would unlock and he could go through and kill more characters. But it's not done that way. It's not done.
And that speaks, we had a comment, somebody that's actually familiar kind of within their school division of that unique curriculum, which I love the irony of the name of that, because to me, it's a one size fits all kind of
It's not
program. So it's not really unique. I mean, there's a little bit of irony in the, but she mentioned that it's convenient for the teachers, but the students still have to be taught it. And she sees a lot of aides giving the answers.
Yeah.
So there is still that level of attention and reinforcement that's being provided and maintaining the behavior on that. It's so funny. I'm always intrigued, just because I'm a dork, about where applied behavior analysis filters into everyday life. And I never really thought about the immediacy of the iPod. And I can remember, I know, Ted, I'm sure you can too, having to rewind or fast forward to a tape, a mixtape to try to get to the song that
Katie
you
and I
wanted.
might be young, but we still had cassette players. We
Look,
still
I had a
No.
car.
CD
I had a car
players.
with only
Yeah.
a tape deck. I understand.
Yeah,
I had a
I had
car
the
with
CD
rubber-
fold file thing. Like,
I have a
wanna
record
listen
player.
to Spice Girls. Like, let's flip.
Yes.
Jim,
That probably had an 8-track.
I had a car
Spice Girls.
with rubber floor mats, 2-speed power glide automatic transmission, AM radio, and I screwed an 8-track in
What's
under the dash and an FM converter because the dash was metal and you could do that then.
Well, I was
Okay, Ted, you
followed
win.
around
Yeah,
by
it's awesome.
You win, Ted. You win.
So, I had the minstrel singing madrigals behind me, like in Monty
Oh, yeah,
Python.
in the back of the car.
Hardly
I
accurate.
was a madrigal. You know,
Okay, could I,
Bell bottoms and madrigals.
could I bring
yeah, it
something
was
on
not
top?
cool.
Yeah.
Okay, I brought this up with Kim. I was in an IEP a couple weeks ago for a kid who the school system has really not done a great job with. And he has a lot of mental health problems, I believe, and based on the school system's own psychological evaluation and educational evaluation that are related to a lot of failure he experiences day after day after day, and kids making fun of him and other things. And so the school identifies a lot of learning deficits, and they want to put him in regular 7th grade classes despite all of the learning deficits they've identified. And when I pointed out the irony there, or the disconnect there, they said, it's okay, we're using an evidence-based curriculum. And I tried to point out to them, well, first I asked, what is it? Where's the evidence? But then I tried to explain to them the difference between curriculum and instruction, and they weren't quite getting it. Jim, what do you think about like the overuse of this term evidence-based? Not like in the name of this company where it's a.
Yes, please. Let's
We
throw that.
specialize in evidence-based instruction. That's what this is, evidence-based instruction that we do. But it's so easy to slap that label evidence-based on anything now.
Yeah, well, it's like the term best practices. It's
Organic.
best practices is whatever the person talking likes.
Right.
And evidence-based, unfortunately, has, when you and I and all of us say evidence-based, what we're looking for is some study that has some sort of control that shows relatively powerfully that what you did caused the effect. That's what we think of evidence. Everybody else seems to think of evidence as there's something printed somewhere that makes the claim that this works. And maybe somebody observed something casually, and maybe they're honest. Maybe the thing does work, but they've only observed it and not really tested to see whether it works generally, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I see evidence-based, and not from you because you folks are pure of heart, but from a lot of other places, it seems like this, like the play therapy or all this other stuff, is there some study somewhere that may not have a control group, may not even have objective measures, and that becomes evidence. And so they use evidence like the word evidence is used in court, where evidence is anything anybody says,
Right.
rather than something that meets some sort of methodological standard, which is the way we use it, which means that the term has been undermined in terms of its usefulness.
Yeah.
And there's still the difference between the product that you purchase and then what you do with it. I find that in my experience and from what I've read, not a lot of teacher preparation programs actually teach teachers how to teach.
Mm-hmm.
And what they learn is often kind of a fad and not quite evidence-based in the good way.
Yeah, and there's
Yeah.
a difference between following directions and a script. I mean, than teaching and instructing. I mean, I kind of think like the was it the Blue Apron that sends you all the ingredients in a box and tells you, that doesn't make you a gourmet chef. You can still mess that up,
I
even
like
though
to
that all
tell
the
myself
materials
I
are
am
there.
after.
Yeah,
Do
it's like
you?
I
Yeah.
made this
Instructions.
gourmet meal. I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
But no, you're right.
we keep coming back around to that instructional concept, and I think that is really where ABA belongs in the schools is helping to design how things are taught, not
Yeah.
what you have, but how you use them and what you do with them.
Well, most teachers
Um,
have the instincts. Most teachers are using ABA instructional methods. It's just not refined. Or used.
Yeah,
Yeah, and we see that weird blending of things, like a lot of sensory integration type stuff. Go ahead, Jim.
I think that that's right. One of the things there's an old article by B.F. Skinner called "The Idols of the Classroom," and one of them is the idol of the great teacher. And the idea is, if we just find these great teachers and spread them around, things will be good for us. And if that were true, that would be true. And we know that there are good teachers who have students who quite clearly teach well for whatever reason. They might not be able to articulate why it is what they do results in these
Right.
Mhm.
educational outcomes. And one of the things that sometimes we make mistakes as behavior analysts is because they don't know the terminology, and they might be doing it by intuition or instinct,
Yeah.
even though they are doing a lot of immediacy of reinforcement, even though they are spreading the reinforcement around and giving a lot of it and doing a lot of shaping. The kid makes a mistake, but it's 10% of what you want, so you effusively praise the kid because tomorrow it'll be easier.
Right.
One of the things we need to do as behavior analysts is go in and help people identify those things that they're doing well.
Mhm.
Because sometimes behavior analysts have the tendency to go in and say, "Oh, I'm here from ABBA to help you." And that isn't always received well.
Yeah.
Because there are teachers out there that are doing well. And of course, there are also teachers out there that aren't doing well because they might be reinforced by the wrong thing. They might be reinforced by the children all sitting there being relatively quiet, but that might not be learning.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good point. We try. That's one of the things that we try to do is try to put a face to what the teachers are doing really well and kind of make those connections between what we know to be good science and good instruction in ABA. But it is challenging because that outcome is always the mindset. I was delivering a professional development one time to a middle school group, and they were talking about a lot of rule governed type behavior and about hats. And I was telling him, I was like, I can get behind the idea. I can be okay with that kid doing his work, doing his math work and learning math and wearing a hat, even though he's not supposed to. And the response that came back was, well, but he's here to learn more than just math. He's here to learn to follow the rules. So I think we have to prioritize certain targets that we really want. And we do get bogged down. We start talking about a lot of like classroom management type things with some of this rule governed behavior. One of the things I keep having in the back of my head that I just think is so comical is that a lot of schools, especially secondary schools, have policies against bandanas. And now they're going to require all the kids to come in with face coverings, so it's really interesting how things and mindsets kind of shift there.
So I guess I know that, at the end of the year, usually fundings come out and they send an email to the lead of the department that says, you have the X amount of money for resources, and that's it. And so usually what we see is a lot of manipulatives, a lot of construction paper, a lot of bears get bought, a lot of just
not real bears,
little ones.
Counting
Just a
bears.
lot of stuff gets bought. And then when we come in, we're like, okay, so how are you instructing this child? Well, I don't have anything to work with. I don't have a curriculum. And I'm like, what do you mean? You have a beautiful closet of gold. Let's go. But do you think maybe where some of this funding is going for just some of the stuff and these resources, which we all know is somewhere throughout the building, maybe should going into some kind of ABA support and showing, hey, here's a manipulative you have purchased. what are the different ways that this can manifest in your classroom?
I'd like to see the funding, well before it gets to that point, go toward actually giving teachers more than that one course in classroom management and PBS and ABA
Yes.
that they have to take.
Yes.
So teachers understand that doing academics is doing behavior,
Yes.
that
Yes.
teaching is changing behavior, that, you know, all these laws of nature that govern other behavior also governs what the teacher is doing, what the student's doing. And maybe that lessens the need for behavior analysts to come into the classroom and coach teachers through stuff.
Mhm.
If they're doing a great job from the beginning, and then they might not need so many manipulatives.
Maybe that would.
Although I would
actually-
like to point out, people still do need EBCS, even if they are.
Maybe Ted.
Let's
that
not
would
put ourselves
also-
out of a job here,
It
Ted.
would be interesting though if that was actually something that was done. Maybe that would help with the what's the R word I'm thinking of?
Retention?
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
The
Well, there
retention of teachers after first year teachers after 5 years.
Yes.
There are some really good behavior analytic teacher training programs. There's
Yeah.
Doug Greer's program at Columbia, and I'm sure I'm sure that there are more.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Well,
Yeah.
and I think the university systems really need to look at their programs, and just like education has not really changed over a long period of time, public education, I don't think teacher preparation courses have really changed over an extensive period of time. They might have like thrown differentiation in there. Maybe you've got to take one class on
Correct me if
special
I'm wrong,
education.
Ted. You have to. I mean, there are the guidelines that the state provides. Correct.
that's just it. Yeah, they're built around
Yeah.
what the state requirements for teacher licensure or certification are.
Yeah.
And then any federal stuff, because the fact that, even though they say they're not, the schools have to make a profit. The
Yeah.
colleges have to make a profit. So they have to be able to fill those classes. And they're not going to offer a class unless they can fill it. So the focus is on what's required to meet the state and federal guidelines.
Yeah. And then when you look at recertification, I mean, one of the things as irritating as is with our boards, that you two are probably grandfathered in on this, but we're every 2 years recertifying with the BACB. We actually have to go out and do continual education. The state of Virginia just shifted to where it's a 10-year license. Your license is good for 10 years.
Yep. I'm good. 10 years.
That's
Yeah,
awesome.
I mean, and
Yeah.
that's insane. I mean, it really is. When you think about the
Oh,
amount
yeah.
of changes that will occur in a decade, not only
That's
on
true.
student population, but instructional methodologies, philosophies,
Yeah.
it just makes no sense. And then you see some of the things, the fads that come into school divisions. A local school division here, I won't name any names, but they were just so hyper focused on Venn diagrams. And they had over 12 hours of professional development throughout an entire year on using Venn diagrams in class, which is just a complete waste of everybody's time. I mean, first of all, how much can you do with a Venn diagram, really? It's pretty simple stuff. It's not overly complicated, but it's putting that information. And when we kind of responded to the COVID issue and started developing trainings for teachers for our supported schools, I think one of the best feedbacks that we got was that we were providing trainings that actually could be used by the teachers. And a lot of the teachers were telling us that. So I think it's on the state, to kind of put more pressure on to design requirements for the university systems to do more with instruction, but also the local school divisions need to be mindful of, putting professional development in that's actually applicable to what the teachers need. So.
Well, they're going to need more funding, and they're going to need more space. And
because desks have to be 6 foot apart now.
well, not just that. I mean, one of the things we talk about going in as behavior analysts, but what we do is we also ignore the principles of ecological psychology, and we tend to pack lots of kids into small spaces that are very busy, which means distracting. And the models of classroom spaces that we have evolved not from science, but from the principles that architects apply to containing kids in relatively small spaces so that one person can manage 20 or 30 7-year-olds.
And it's
Mhm.
not
I think-
common that the same architects who design schools also
Design-
design prisons.
Absolutely.
And I think it's, I mean, I've babysat like one or two kids. I think it's a miracle that one person can manage like 27-year-olds or 8-year-olds. I don't know how it's done. So they do learn something in their education programs, because that's quite an amazing behavior management feat to keep all of these kids all year more or less contained in one space and have some of them learn and some of them learn very well. But without the money, you know, you're going to end up devolving to management rather than teaching.
Right.
And that's one of the things that we see. We want to come in with an educational innovation here. Here's this, you know, this program here. TED talks about curriculum versus actual learning. But if you want the individualized learning for the students, you might not be able to do 30 different programs for 30 different kids, but at least a little more specificity for the, you know, kids who learn this way or that way. We can't do that right now, because as in almost any administrative system, as the funding goes down, the priorities go towards maintaining the system itself, and the other things that the system does start falling by the wayside. And that's one of the things I think we're seeing now, and one of the difficulties, because one of the things you might have seen in some schools, but not all, is that if somebody comes in with what might be a really cool innovation, the schools tend to be resistant and risk averse, because somebody wants them to devote some money that they don't have to it, and some space that they don't have to it. And so you come in and say, I'm going to do this thing, but we need a room and we need some money and we need a teacher. And you've already lost, because they don't have any of that to set aside, even if everybody agrees that would be a cool thing.
Right. So I want to cycle back around a little bit to pseudoscience. And I'm curious, one of the things that I've heard a lot in the past couple of weeks, because of the situation I'm dealing with, is brain balance. Are you familiar with that at all?
But yeah, I've heard of it. My brain probably isn't balanced, but I've heard of it.
Why are people reaching out to that? Ted, are you very familiar with it?
Yeah, and I have a client now who used to participate in that, and I'm trying to remember who it is, and I can't remember.
Yeah.
But they were not happy with it. And I've read about it. I've read on the website, and, you know, it promises things that I have no idea how it's going to deliver. So.
Yeah, I've read all the literature I could find about it so far, and what I find in the situation I'm dealing with is it's kind of the the person administering it is telling the person, well, you're not doing your exercises well enough, you're not working hard enough at it, so you're not. That's why you're not seeing success, and that's kind of some hanky stuff in my head, but I keep hearing it pop up, and it's circulating through the United States a little bit. And
there's two in near me. Should I go do a little case study?
Yeah, you should. Yeah, absolutely.
Why not?
No, I think that's great. And then Jim, one of the things we've kind of like just sprinkled on a little bit, your idea of sensory integration, like where that fits in to all this discussion. I know Ted's opinion, and I know my opinion. I'm just curious if you could articulate yours.
Well, it doesn't fit in anywhere, unfortunately. I mean, 30, 40 years ago, the theory behind it, even though it had no real neurology behind it, at least had some kind of face validity to it. The notion that, you know, their kids were more or less doing too little, and we give them more, or too much they do. And, you know, that their senses weren't properly integrated. What they were seeing and hearing weren't meeting. And that has an attractiveness to it. And it's a hypothesis that can be tested. Unfortunately, like a lot of psychological theories about why people don't learn or don't perform effectively in whatever environment they're in, it didn't really pan out. And the effects that were seen were often the ancillaries that you sometimes get. If you do more stuff with kids and spend more time with them, the incidental contingencies may be doing all the work. And that's what the research tends to show. You put the kid in the weighted vest and nothing happens compared to a non-weighted vest. You do the brushing and the joint compressions, and nothing happens. Now, one of the interesting things that does happen is the stuff that I was talking about with Robert Rosenthal. You can do, what was her name? Kiera Moore did a study under Bruce, why am I saying Bruce Ahern? His name isn't Bruce Ahern.
Oh, Bill Ahern.
Bill Ahern. And basically they had her trained up in doing the thing properly, because the criticism of these studies is, oh, you don't know how to do it. So she was trained up to certify. They got the treatment prescribed by a real sensory integrator, and they did it well. They tested treatment fidelity, and nothing happened, as you might imagine. Now, the observers, the parents, the teachers, and everybody looking at it, all, well, I don't know all, but mostly saw the positive effects that were supposed to happen, even though all the graphs just went along. And that's one of the reasons why these pseudoscientific treatments or quasi-scientific treatments of things like brain balance seem to work. There's probably some incidental reinforcement in it. Probably people like it. Probably the kids who stay with it are the kind of kids who are going to learn from other things anyway. And the kids who don't work with it are going to be vetoed out. So the people doing it, even if they're pure of heart, are going to see kids who improve. Mm-hmm. Not because the kids are improving, but because attrition gets rid of the kids who don't. And so sensory integration is like that.
Yeah, and we see it, it's like gum on the shoe. I mean, a lot of the divisions that we work in, if it's in the classroom, it's in the classroom, or they have like sensory rooms that they take the kids to. But I like that idea of explaining it through incidental contingencies, because that is what's really happening. Somebody has to take that kid to the sensory room, so you're getting that one-on-one attention, you're getting that escape also from task demand,
or you're getting or away from, or you're escaping.
Yeah,
I've also had, like, I mean, I worked a former student, the parent was like, just stick them on a trampoline, they do great. Mm-hmm. And you're like, we can't have that in the school. And they're like, well, that's what we do at home. And I'm like, yeah, probably because there was the presentation of a task demand, they didn't want to do it, so go to your trampoline. You need to
okay,
dump it out. Completely fine. Because then also, you're hot and sweaty. You have to you got to go wash your hands. Oh, there's no more time to do what you asked me to do. Sorry.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So Jim, big question for you. Let's say you had a blank canvas in public schools, and you could implement, like, focus on one thing, one part of ABA coming into public schools. What do you think the most important part to trickle in would be?
Well, so I have a blank canvas. One of the things I would do is I'd probably double or triple teacher pay. And
yeah,
I mean that these folks work hard. I mean, we put 20 or 30 kids in front of them all day for hundreds of days a year, and then we mostly underpay them, and we expect them to do a lot. And when things don't happen, we get critical of the schools when sometimes they're doing all they could possibly do.
Yeah.
Right.
And, but if you wanted to do something ABA wise, one of the things that I think I would do, I don't know, this is a theory and I could be wrong, is I wouldn't worry about high level formality in teaching ABA principles. Mm-hmm. What I would, because that's one of the things we tend to do because we're good at it. We have terms, we want everybody to know every one of the 45 million conditioned motivating operations we've invented. What I would want people to know is that immediacy of reward is the key. Mm-hmm. A tiny little reward, just a smile at a child when they approximate what we want, if it happens right away, is it a huge reward. So you want lots of reward immediately, and teach the teachers, and some of them are already good at this, teach the teachers to recognize the components of the final performance that they want, and teach them to reward those things a lot and immediately. Because the people who are successful in using ABA aren't the people who know the distinction between this term and that term. They're the people who do things right away, immediately. They know that all they have, for example, let me give an example. You might only have 3 or 4 opportunities a day to reinforce some behavior you want. If you can do it right away, you don't need a big reinforcer. But then you think, I've got 156 days. If I can reinforce this behavior 3 times a day, I've got 300 reinforcers a year to work with.
Mhm.
So you also have to teach the folks who are doing this what good teachers do, and is not to get impatient. And one thing behavior analysts do is they tend to get impatient, and they want to teach the skill so the graph goes up like that.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And some things don't need to be learned today. Some things only need to be learned by the end of the year. And so, but sometimes, and I'm going to go back to this, even though I've said it before, if you can reinforce immediately and strongly, you might only need the 1 reinforcer or 2. One of the bad things that sometimes behavior analysts get taught is gradualism. And the reason they get taught gradualism is they're often not given access to powerful reinforcers that they can deliver immediately. And so we get the gradual acquisition of behavior, whereas if we could reinforce right away, recognize the components and the parts of what we want as part of a total, you'll get what you want most of the time.
Well, and I think to piggyback off of that too, for teachers is that it's individualized, because often what we hear is, but what about the other kids?
Right.
They're going to see that they get to do, like, they just had to do this, and then we give them, and then I give them this. What about the rest of them? And it's like, we want this child to know that, like, even just coming to their seat, when you say, come to your seat, and as soon as they sit down, you're like, thank you so much for sitting down. We give them that reinforcer, and then we get that behavior momentum going. That's something that we really have to focus on a lot. But I agree, the immediacy is huge. I mean, today's success, in my opinion, was for the past few weeks, the student that I've been working with, I would say, good morning, and they just start yelling. And the past 2 times, like, earlier this week, I said, good morning. And they said, good morning, Miss Kate. And I was like, good morning. I said, I love the way that you talk to me. We're going to play a song now. And then it happened again this morning. So I agree with you 1,000% immediacy and individualization of it.
Yeah, and cycling back around to what you said about teacher pay, I mean, I think that totally is an ABA concept, right? We're reinforcing the teachers proportionately, kind of factoring that matching law a little bit to what's going on. One of our, we had a comment that they've actually been accused by a department chair for spoiling a student because she's providing reinforcement so quickly and so much. And I would just say,
You do you.
smile and shake your head, but keep doing what you're doing, because what I've seen in really well-managed classrooms are teachers that are able to spread their attention out as it's needed and prioritize where it goes and when it goes there. And that usually is what, especially in general education settings, what defines good classroom management. But Jim, it's been a real pleasure having you on today. I really enjoyed the talk, and you're welcome back anytime. We kind of do these just to listen to ourselves talk sometimes. But really,
And not to drive anybody living in our house crazy with all the behavior.
yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah, it's an outlet.
It's an
for us,
outlet
so.
for sure. Yes.
But I've actually got to jump and work with a student. So I think we are going to keep going with these, Ted, but we're going to go down to just on Tuesdays. We're going to do 1 day a week, keep Tuesdays at 9:30. And again, Jim, if you ever want to jump on with us, we'd love to have you again. And I learned a lot. I've got a bunch of notes of quotes from you I'm going to steal in professional developments moving forward. But really enjoyed it. With that, I'll say goodbye.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
everyone.
Thank you.
Love you guys.
Have a great day.
Love you.
Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.